question and answer on the subject of justice in Russia. This is, of course, a subject that has received a great deal of attention in the, most people would say the last 2 or 3 years, but I think we can say the last 70 or 80. And it continues to preoccupy us because justice in Russia, concepts of transparency, of basic fairness, continue to raise their head in all kinds of ways, whether it be through practice in the day-to-day court systems or the organization of the institutions of justice or any number of other compelling and interesting issues. We have today with us an exceptional group who have both good theoretical and practical experience, and I should say on-the-ground experience, looking at this issue and reporting on it and analyzing it over the course of many decades. Before I go any further, let me just ask everybody to please cell phones off, if I can do that. We are streaming on the web, so you will not want your best question interrupted by someone else's cell phone jingling a pleasant melody of some kind. Today we have three wonderful contributors, exceptionally well qualified to discuss the issue at hand. Let me introduce them very briefly. The first, of course, known to many of you who read the newspapers, is Vadim Klugant. He served since the spring of 2007 as the lead trial lawyer for the defense team of Mikhail Khodorkovsky in Russia. Since 2005, Vadim has been practicing law to defend the rights and interests of his clients, which include large corporations, individuals, and religious organizations. And he has, uniquely in some respects, managed to obtain acquittals from Russian courts and has had several cases terminated on rehabilitating grounds. He has represented the victims of anti-Semitic attack, of which both the Supreme Court in Russia and the Moscow City Court ruled in their favor. And this case has served as a precedent for subsequent criminal cases of religious extremism. In 1990, Vadim Klugant was elected to the Congress of the People's Deputies of the Russian Federation, and until 1993, he served as a member of the upper house of the Russian Parliament, the Constitutional Commission, and the Constitutional Council of the Russian Federation. He has participated directly in the development of the laws on the investigative committee, police, and procuracy, and in the preparation of judicial reform. He became, somewhat later, the mayor of Magnitogorsk, and has worked successfully in this position during the most difficult years in Russia's post-Soviet history. Welcome to you, Vadim Klugant. Our second speaker, well known to those of you who have been coming to the Hudson Institute for many years, Andrei Piontkowski. He is a visiting fellow here. He has been with us for a long time. He's a well-known analyst in Russia, where he contributes regularly to such publications as Novaya Gazeta and the Moscow Times. He is, like so many of Russia's leading intellectuals and leading political intellectuals, a trained mathematician. And he's the author of several best-selling books on the Putin presidency in Russia, including his most recent book in English called The Russian Identity. And I would just add that only yesterday, his latest book in Russian was released, which, for those of you who can't see the Russian back there, I'll translate it. It is The Road to Slavery. Andrei can tell you more about that, I'm sure, in the question and answer where you can buy it, and I'm sure that he'd appreciate somebody buying several thousand copies this afternoon. Our third speaker today, David Satter, also well known to those of you for all kinds of reasons. He has been with the Hudson Institute in one capacity or another for many years. He is the former Moscow correspondent of the Times of London, the Financial Times of London. He has been a senior fellow here at Hudson and at a visiting scholar at Johns Hopkins SAIS for a number of years. It was in 1976 that he was named the correspondent for the London Financial Times. He worked in Moscow for 6 years, from 1976 to 82, during which time he particularly sought out Soviet citizens with the intention of preserving their accounts of the Soviet totalitarian system for posterity and for the preservation of the historical record. And as you will see, most of you know, he has done that exceptionally well. He also served as a special correspondent on Soviet affairs for the Wall Street Journal, including on the paper's editorial page. But he is probably best known to most of you as the author of 2 books. The first, The Age of Delirium, The Decline and Fall of the Soviet Union, which was published in 1996 and then issued again in 2001. And the second book, The Darkness at Dawn, The Rise of the Russian Criminal State, published by Yale in 2003. His books have been translated into Russian, Estonian, Latvian, Czech, Portuguese, and Vietnamese. His Age of Delirium is also being made into a documentary film by the Russian director Andrei Nekrasov in a U.S.-German-Ukrainian joint production. And he's currently working on a new book about the Russian attitude toward the communist past. He has written extensively throughout the professional and popular media, has appeared regularly as a commentator on Russian/Soviet/Eastern European affairs on just about every electronic medium known to man, and I won't bother to identify all of them because I'm sure that you have all seen him there. Currently, David teaches a course on contemporary Russian history at Johns Hopkins SAIS and is a favorite, I can tell you, among his students. That being the cast of characters, let me say no more, but let Vadim Flugant introduce the subject for you. He will speak through a translator, so I encourage you all to be patient, pay attention, and enjoy the conversation. Thanks so much. Vadim, if you like.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope for your understanding because I'm going to speak Russia. I'm going to do that because I'm worried if I can be I cannot rely, in other words, on my English in such a responsible mission which I have here. So, thank you very much for understanding. Ну, прежде всего, хотел бы уважаемому институту Хадсона, организаторам этой встречи, выразить искреннюю признательность за приглашение. За внимание к нашему делу, к нашей проблеме. Я хочу сказать от себя, что вот очень драматическое название нашего сегодняшнего разговора, на мой взгляд, потому что отношения России и верховенства права — это настолько сложная, болезненная и многогранная тема, что говорить о ней можно много и долго.
Rule of law and the attitude to Russia is a subject that is sensitive, painful, and very substantive, and one that can be discussed for a truly long period of time.
Эта драматическая история отношений России и верховенства права сопровождалась многими трагедиями, жертвами человеческими, поломанными судьбами.
This dramatic story of the relationship between Russia and rule of law has seen multitudes and multitudes of ruined lives.
О некоторых из этих судеб я сегодня собираюсь сказать вам.
Some of those ruined lives I will tell you about today.
Но сейчас я хочу, прежде чем перейти к конкретной истории, хочу сказать, что еще одним следствием вот этих непростых отношений явилось то, что сегодня в России 21 века, люди, немногие понимают, что же такое на самом деле верховенство права.
But before I go into the specifics, I will offer just one other thought, and that is that today in modern Russia, Russia of the 21st century, as a matter of fact, many people, ordinary people, rank-and-file people, do not quite understand what rule of law is.
И чем отличается, например, верховенство права от диктатуры закона, которую очень любил провозглашать предыдущий президент Российской Федерации, господин Путин.
Do not understand what the difference is between the rule of law and something that the former president of the Russian Federation, Mr. Putin, used to talk about at length, something that he described as dictatorship of law.
И в целом, к сожалению, сегодня в российском обществе право далеко не всеми воспринимается как цивилизационная ценность, каковой оно, несомненно, является.
And on the whole, far from everybody in the Russian society of today sees law as the civilizational value that it is.
Это большая больная проблема России, в которой нужно двигаться очень быстро и очень эффективно в направлении ее преодоления.
This is a very sensitive, very painful, and very vast issue, one that Russia needs to move really fast to amend.
Поскольку я, и далеко не только я, убежден, что никакая модернизация невозможна там, где нет свободы, где нет защиты человеческого творчества, человеческой личности. Это просто взаимоисключающие вещи.
I'm saying this because I do not think that any kind of modernization is possible in a land where there is no freedom of the individual, where there is no protection of the individual's creativity.
Именно поэтому дело Михаила Ходорковского, Платона Лебедева и других заложников, связанных с компанией ЮКОС, дело о разрушении этой компании ЮКОС, является таким очень ярким индикатором этой проблемы. И, соответственно, его исход будет индикатором того, в какую же сторону все-таки движется Россия. Потому что в этом деле, как в капле воды, все болячки собраны.
What's important is that the YUKOS case, the case of Mikhail Khodorkovsky, Platon Lebedev, and other individuals who have become hostages to the to and of the YUKOS case, that case mirrors both this problem, one that Russia needs to really move fast to address, and other problems of Russia that it is experiencing today. And depending on which way the YUKOS case and the Khodorkovsky and Lebedev case will unfold, we will be able to judge in which direction Russia will be moving.
Если коротко одним словом представить себе, что такое дело Ходорковского, это расправа.
If I were to sum up Khodorkovsky's case in a nutshell, preferably in one word, I would use the word massacre.
Это расправа, которая осуществляется в политических и коррупционных целях.
It's a massacre that's driven by political and corruption considerations and goals.
И уже 8-й год.
And that's a massacre that is now well into its 8th year.
Сейчас в Хамовническом суде Москвы близится к завершению так называемый второй процесс по обвинению Михаила Ходорковского и Платона Лебедева.
The so-called second trial, where charges have been brought against Khodorkovsky and Lebedev, that is being heard in the Kamovniki District Court in Moscow, is coming to an end.
Процесс совершенно циничный, насквозь фальсифицированный.
This trial is completely cynical, and it is falsified throughout.
Циничность его заключается в том, что используется внешняя видимость судебной процедуры, такая картинка красивая.
It is cynical because the trial has basically been turned into a respectable visual for others to view as a legitimate legal proceeding.
И под прикрытием этой красивой картинки людям пытаются добавить еще существенный тюремный срок, который может составить до 15 лет.
And this smokescreen, this respectable visual, is being used in order to add to the time that the two defendants have already spent behind the bars another sentence, which in the worst case scenario will keep them behind the bars for another 15 years.
Обвинение, которое предъявлено, насквозь полностью от начала до конца придуманное. Обвинение в том, чего не только никто не совершал, но не могло быть совершено, невозможно совершить.
The charges are self-defeating. They have been concocted from scratch and hold no water whatsoever. And not only the defendants did not commit the crimes that they have been accused of in the second trial, but as I said, the charges are self-defeating. What the defendants have been accused of simply could not have been done by anybody.
Обвинение утверждает, что в течение 6 лет у компании ЮКОС группой лиц во главе с Ходорковским похищалась вся производимая продукция в объеме 100%. 350 миллионов тонн нефти за 6 лет.
The charges state that over the course of 6 years, the entire production of the YUKOS Oil company, which is 350 million metric tons, all 100% of it, has been embezzled by a group of individuals, allegedly led by Mikhail Khodorkovsky.
Как это могло произойти, если в течение всех этих 6 лет компания развивалась, в компании работало больше 100 тысяч человек, которые получали зарплату, делались огромные инвестиции, платились огромные налоги, компания была признана лучшим налогоплательщиком страны. Как совместить эти две вещи, что единственный источник существования у компании был украден, и так в течение 6 лет, и все это вот происходило, обвинение не удосуживается объяснить.
So how could this possibly have happened where over the same period of time YUKOS was recognized as the best corporate taxpayer in all of Russia? It employed a staff on average of 100,000 individuals, paying their salaries, making very hefty capital investments, paying humongous amounts of taxes. So the company carried on for 6 years. Although, according to the charges, its very source of livelihood, oil that it produced, the entire 100% of it, were being embezzled at the same time. How to reconcile these two completely mutually exclusive scenarios, the prosecution and the charges do not even bother to try and do that.
Вместо этого они принесли 200 томов всяких фальшивок и никчемных бумажек, про которые говорят, что это доказательство вот этого их безумного обвинения. И говорят, что дело очень сложное, поэтому в нем трудно разобраться, а защита специально вот прикидывается и говорит, что этого не могло быть. А на самом деле они разобрались, что это могло быть и было.
So what the prosecution has done instead is slapped together 200 volumes of all kinds of forged, falsified, and simply erroneous and incorrect documents, which they have referred to as evidence. They've also claimed that this is actually a very, very complicated case, and the defense claims that it is impossible, but we, the prosecutors, have actually been able to get to the bottom of it, and we know that it's possible and that it happened.
Но среди этих 200 томов нет ни одного слова о том, где и когда пропала хотя бы капля нефти, и кто это когда обнаружил, и чем это подтверждается.
Nowhere in the 200 volumes there is any information whatsoever about how and where even a drop of oil was embezzled, and who the crime was identified and exposed by, and what the evidence that corroborates that is.
5 лет назад Михаил Кходорковский и Платон Лебедев был осужден к 8 годам тюрьмы, колонии, в том числе за то, что якобы недоплачены налоги ЮКОСом от прибыли с продажи этой самой нефти, которая сейчас заявляется как полностью похищенная.
The sentence that, the conviction that Platon Lebedev and Khodorkovsky were given 5 years ago was partly based on the fact that they allegedly had failed to pay part of the tax on the profits generated by YUKOS by selling that very same oil that is now has been presented as having been completely 100% of it embezzled by the same individual.
Это и сегодня утверждает официальный представитель Российской Федерации в Страсбурге в Европейском суде по правам человека, в то время как другие представители Российской Федерации в Хамовническом суде продолжают утверждать, что вся нефть похищена.
And even today, official Russian representatives claim what was claimed in the verdict 5 years ago in the European Court of Human Rights, whereas their counterparts claim something that is inconsistent and mutually exclusive with those other claims in the courtroom where we're defending our clients.
Когда мы говорим нашим оппонентам, что вы лжете и в одном, и в другом случае, но, может быть, вы хотя бы выберете одну версию лжи, потому что они не совмещаются между собой.
Where we tell our courtroom adversaries that you're lying in both cases, but why wouldn't you just pick one bunch of lies and stick with them? Because when you're lying in two places and what you're saying is self-defeating and mutually exclusive,
они без тени сомнения отвечают, что хищение и уклонение от налогов не исключают друг друга.
They tell us with a straight face and no trace of doubt whatsoever that embezzlement and tax evasion are not mutually exclusive, so everything is hunky-dory.
Это было одно дело, а теперь другое дело.
And that was one case, but now a different case is being heard.
И не прикидывайтесь, говорят они, что вы этого не понимаете. Вы все понимаете на самом деле.
And don't fake innocence, don't pretend that you don't understand anything. You, in fact, they tell us, understand everything.
Вот такой процесс, вот такая притворная история.
So this is what the trial is like, and this is what it's about. These are the fake charges and the sham trial.
Понятно, что для того, чтобы попытаться протащить всю эту фальшивку через суд, в ход идут такие методы, как пытки, угрозы, шантаж, фальсификации.
Now they have the job of dragging all this bunch of lies through the courtroom, and for that they have employed such techniques as torture, threats, falsification, and harassment.
Которые задевают не только российских граждан, напрямую задевают и иностранных, в том числе американских граждан и компаний.
Not only to Russian citizens, but also citizens of the U.S., both private citizens and corporations.
И я, говоря это, имею в виду конкретные факты, конкретных людей, конкретные организации.
And as I'm saying that, I'm not being vague. What I have in mind is very specific facts and specific situations and specific names.
Каковы уже сейчас видимые последствия этого дела для правовой ситуации, в том числе для проблемы верховенства права в России?
One might ask what the implications and consequences of this case, even now, are there for the Russian judiciary and for Russia's international situation.
Я сошлюсь на очень авторитетное мнение, с которым полностью согласен и сам.
I will refer to a very credible opinion, which I happen to subscribe to completely.
Это мнение принадлежит Тамаре Морщиковой, одной из авторитетнейших юристов, руководителей Конституционного суда Российской Федерации.
This opinion has been expressed by Tamara Morshikova, who is a very credible lawyer and a member.
Она сейчас советник, а в прошлом заместитель председателя.
She's currently an advisor of Russia's Constitutional Court, and in the past she's been deputy chairman of the Russian Constitutional Court.
Я считаю, говорит она, что дело Ходорковского это определенный сигнал о том, что уровень требований к судебной системе можно серьезно снизить.
I quote. I believe, she says, that the Khodorkovsky case is a signal that the level of requirements vis-a-vis the judiciary system can be radically lowered.
Не обязательно соблюдать процессуальную форму.
Meaning that there is no need to observe the procedural norms.
Не обязательно соблюдать принцип, согласно которому нельзя наказывать дважды за одно и то же.
Meaning that double jeopardy doesn't apply anymore.
Не обязательно соблюдать принцип, согласно которому дело или обвинение, переданное в суд, не может модифицироваться, в том числе пополняться, обрастать новыми эпизодами.
Meaning that the principle no longer needs to be observed, whereby a case that has been brought into the courtroom can no longer be modified or enhanced or supplemented or amended in any way, shape, or form once it is being heard.
И все это, конечно, существенно снижает стандарты доказанности и меняет сами понятия обвинений.
And all of this, she says, of course, considerably reduces the standards of the proof of burden and
Меняет сами понятия обвинений,
changes the very notion of charges,
которые заявлены по этим делам.
the very notion of charges brought in these cases.
Ни мошенничество, ни хищение не существует теперь в прежнем виде.
Neither fraud nor embezzlement any longer exist in their former format.
Понятия этих преступлений настолько существенно искажены, что речь идет уже о каких-то совершенно иначе трактуемых составах уголовных деяний.
The concepts of these crimes, fraud and embezzlement, have been distorted in such a significant degree that what is now the subject of discussion is a completely differently interpreted corpus delicti.
Я постарался показать вам, уважаемые дамы и господа, почему это дело далеко выходит за пределы сломанных судеб и человеческих трагедий конкретных людей, хотя это само по себе страшная проблема.
I have tried, ladies and gentlemen, to briefly show to you why this case, although it is a case that involves the ruined lives of many individuals, which in itself is horrific enough, nevertheless reaches far beyond those individuals' lives.
Почему в глобальном мире в 21 веке это дело не может считаться только внутренним делом России?
I have tried to show why in the 21st century, in what is now a global world, this case cannot be viewed as a domestic criminal case in the Russian Federation.
Особенно, когда на повестке дня стоят такие задачи, как модернизация, перезагрузка. Все очень красиво и правильно.
When the national agenda now features such fascinating goals and terminology as modernization, resetting, and such like.
Это наша общечеловеческая проблема и наша общечеловеческая задача противостоять этой расправе. И бороться за справедливость в исходе этого дела.
This case is our common, universal problem, and it is our common responsibility to fight this legal massacre.
Я знаю, что Институт Хадсона провозглашает своей миссией вызов стереотипам, поиск нестандартных решений.
I know that the Hudson Institute sets as part of its mission a quest for out-of-the-box solutions and resisting stereotypes.
Это очень нестандартная история.
This entire story is not routine in any way.
Которая, несомненно, требует нахождения совместного, системного, нестандартного решения.
And it certainly requires that a solution be found for this story that would be systemic and that would be out of the box, as much as this story itself is out of the box.
И отбрасывание стереотипов.
And also, this would require stereotypes to be cast aside.
Давайте попробуем вместе пойти этим путем.
If this story is to see a happy ending, and I'm hoping that we can all go down this path.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Vadim. As you can see, the intellectual framework for a good discussion has just been laid. Let me build on this platform and ask Andrei Khodorkovsky, who has had his own direct experience with the rule of law, to pick up the conversation from there. Andrei?
Thank you. May I
You may.
from here? I feel more comfortable. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the panel to invite me again to this institution where I spent 4 fascinating years of my life and my professional career. I feel myself at home here. Anders mentioned the title of my new book, The Third Road to Serfdom. And one of the points of this book, that this third road of Russia to serfdom is paved by Khodorkovsky case and dozens other cases of many other unknown to world Khodorkovsky in Russian regions, in small cities where business, and not only business, where any institution of civil society feel absolutely defenseless before a sort of autocracy. Vadim found a very good word to describe what is going on Khodorkovsky trial. Certainly it's not a justice, it's a massacre. And I try to explain the audience what Khodorkovsky is being massacred for and why Mr. Putin is so passionate about this process. Because everybody knows that Putin is losing his temper each time when he asked any innocent question about Khodorkovsky on his press conference. Mikhail Khodorkovsky was one of them, one of the leading Russian oligarchs who in the beginning of 90s amassed their huge fortune mainly through connection with power, using what is called in Russia administrative reserves. It was inevitable in the process of privatization because any privatization is decided by and directed by some top bureaucratic authority. And Khodorkovsky, by the end of 90s, has become the first among them who realized that maybe it's very easy way to become the wealthiest person in the world. But following the same road, the same model of economic system, the same rule of behavior, it's impossible for him to make his company, to make YUKOS one of the leading company in the world. And it's impossible for his country, for our country, to break into post-industrial society. And he changed the patterns of running his company drastically. He made his company transparent, introduced a Western system of account and corporate management, opened his incomes, and began to spend a huge amount of money on education, on philanthropy, on social project. It was enough to provoke suspicion among top bureaucracy and among his colleagues. But Khodorkovsky has great ambition of Russian citizen. He wanted not only to change his company, he wanted to change the way in which Russia as a country is run. And dramatic events, the most dramatic events, not only for all this personal story of Khodorkovsky, but I think for the history of modern Russia, happened in February 2003. On meeting in Kremlin between the President Putin and leading Russian businessmen. Khodorkovsky addressed to the President, Mr. President, we together created a very inefficient system. This system of corporate crony, some say criminal gangster capitalism dooms Russia to marginalization and decay. I'm trying to change it, and many of my colleagues are trying to follow me. But we can't do it without state. How? Because your official, Mr. President, your officials, your top officials, your ministers, are bribe takers and thieves. And he gave some very striking example. The most striking of them was the case of somebody named Vavilov, who was head of a small oil company, and by the way, former deputy finance minister. And he sold his company to state for a fantastically incredible for this assets sum $600 million. It was evident that this money was shared between Vavilov and ministers of the government. It was an existential moment for Mr. Putin, for his future place in Russian history textbook. If he had followed Khodorkovsky appeal, who would become a leader of modernization in Russia, a great political leader of our country. But he reacted not as a leader of the country, as a statesman of great stature. He reacted as a godfather of kleptocracy. He became furious and unleashed verbal attack on Khodorkovsky, and after this meeting, this process of massacre began. Only a year after, in 2004, it was evident why Putin was so furious, because he repeated this criminal scheme on Mr. Vavilov in 2004 when his crony, Mr. Abramovich, who got his company Sibnev for song during loans for shares auction, sold it to the state, which means practically to Mr. Putin, for $13.7 billion. And this money already were divided between bureaucracy and Mr. Abramovich. So Mr. Abramovich, in this situation, demonstrated what he really is. He is just a pocket wallet of Putin and his entourage. So this, since then, the fate of Putin and Khodorkovsky became very much interconnected. There is in quantum mechanics, there is such fundamental notion as entanglement, where two physical particles may be far apart in different corners of universe, but there's in some almost mystical way their location and their state is interconnected. If state of one particle is changed, immediately happens with other. The same thing with Mr. Putin and Mr. Khodorkovsky. They are always imprisoned. Khodorkovsky imprisoned first in Siberia camp and now in Matrosskaya Tishina in Moscow. And Putin is imprisoned in Kremlin also as a creator, as a godfather, but at the same time as a hostage of this system of criminal capitalism. I tell you a very sad thing, that Khodorkovsky will stay in prison as long as Putin stays in Kremlin. And vice versa. If Putin loses his position as a ruler of the country, he will very soon face criminal investigation and finally find himself in the prison because this connection with Abramovich is not the only his economic cry. Everybody knows about empires of Timchenko, by the way, Finnish citizen, his former friends of KGB, who billionaire who is responsible for exporting of at least one half of Russian oil. These two gentlemen, they are connected by this invisible chain. And no modernization of Russia is possible while Putin and Kremlin and Khodorkovsky is in prison. And it's not only a Russian problem. Many times I was asked in Western audience, what can we do? How we can help this situation? It's not a humanitarian problem of one person named Mikhail Borisovich Khodorkovsky. It's an existential problem of Russia as a society, of the future of Russia, because this system of kleptocracy, it dooms Russia to marginalization and finally disintegration. The best way to help Russia is to help dismantling this system. In today's situation, when approximately in a month the sentence in this infamous trial will be issued, I think West and United States particularly should declare very strongly, in ambiguous way, that no other sentence of Khodorkovsky's Lebedev is acceptable. That this is even not the issue of so-called sovereign democracy and the Russian independence. Sometimes Kremlin propaganda officers like to say that, well, democracy is not important for the country. What's important, what we're trying to introduce, is rule of law, property right, and so other. Well, this is about rule of law, or rather about absolute absence of rule. This is about property right, or rather absence of property right, and absence of independent judiciary. There should be a line on the scent that no other business as usual is possible with Russian businessmen after new sentence for Khodorkovsky. And by the way, it will be very good signal for Russian elites, because everybody in Russia now understands that it's, first of all, it's a matter of personal vendetta of one man. And most of the people, most of Russian business communities, they will not be ready to sacrifice many inconveniences, beginning with visa denials and up to accounts freezing, just for the madness of this one person. And my final point will be about this unstandard solution. I know one unstandard and radical solution for the problem of Khodorkovsky and problem of Russia. Khodorkovsky and Putin should swap their locations.
Thank you, Andrei. Well, David Satter, you've been watching the rule of law in Russia for a long time, and the question has been posed several times: can Russia be a normal state without some serious work on this? How do you see this? How can you pull this all together for us?
Well, I'll do my best. I mean, is this microphone working? Yeah, I guess it is. Well, it can't become a normal state without the rule of law. I was fascinated by Vadim's reference to Tamara Morshakova, who is was one of the justices on the Constitutional Court, and is one of the most honest and perceptive observers of the Russian legal system. Vadim said that she says that the standards of Russian justice in light of the Khodorkovsky case are being lowered. Now that's a remarkable statement, especially coming from her, because the last time she assessed the Russian legal system, she said that any decision in any case can be dictated by the authorities. So therefore, if she says that now the situation is getting even worse, we can get some example of just how bad the situation is in Russia vis-a-vis the rule of law. And despite the claims of President Medvedev that he's opposed to legal nihilism, which apparently he thinks affects everyone except him. And this also is interesting coming from him, because while he was chairman of Gazprom, before he became president, 6% of the shares of the company disappeared. In any case, on the subject of the rule of law, it's worth taking a minute or two just to describe how the system works. Because in Russia, every locality has a local court chairman. The original idea was that the court chairman would simply organize the work of the court, determine schedules, salaries, promotions, and take care of administrative work, but not interfere with the actual decisions themselves. As it happened, however, and as a result of the development of the so-called power vertical that was created under Putin, the chairman of the courts in each locality became the in-place dictators who determined which judges would get which cases, which judges would be fired, which judges would be given decent housing and decent salaries and conditions, considerations that should play no role whatsoever in any normal legal system in affecting results, but in Russia play an important role because of the culture of poverty that still exists there. And it, through this system, became possible to be reasonably sure that in any politically sensitive case, the decision would be determined by the political authorities, and that in any case in which it was a question of an economic claim, the decision would go to that party which was able to pay the largest bribe. Well, how did this all come about? And where does the Khodorkovsky case fit in the general landscape of the Russian legal system and the future of Russia? I think to consider that, we have to go back to really the dawn of the post-Soviet era, and even to the advice that was given by, among others, American advisors to the new Russian government. It was taken to be obvious by the free marketers who took over in Russia that law was definitely secondary to the development of a capitalist free market economy. That once free market institutions were created, democratic institutions would follow automatically, and that those people who had obtained their wealth and their property illegally would lose it because of their inability to compete in a fair market situation. This idea, which was taken to be really gospel by the so-called young reformers, was repeatedly reinforced by bad foreign advice, including the advice of the United States. And it was taken to be absolutely normal in Russia that property wasn't distributed fairly, that it wasn't earned, that auctions were not fair, but rather that it was appropriated on the basis of corrupt ties. And those people who became the biggest property owners, the people who we call oligarchs, were those who were the most corrupt, the most vicious, and the most well-connected to the former communist structure of power. Bureaucrats who controlled the privatization process had no money but great power. Businessmen began to have money, and they understood that the most important destination for their starting capital was the purchase of a bureaucrat. Each bureaucrat who was bought made possible the purchase of other bureaucrats. Boris Berezovsky was famous for his ability to buy bureaucrats and to use the decisions that he purchased in order to gain the capital necessary to buy further people. But his experience was not out of the ordinary particularly. There was another factor too, and that was the willingness to commit crimes. One of the murkiest aspects of the 90s in Russia is to what extent the people who achieved the biggest fortunes used murder in order to get where they are. Problem is that investigating in a serious way is not a practical proposition in Russia, because it's pretty much a guarantee that the investigator will end up joining the victims whose fate he's trying to clarify. So we have indications, we have hints. We know that in 1994 a meeting was held of the oligarchs at which they all promised not to murder each other. We know that various political figures claim to have been asked by one oligarch or another to bump off one of their competitors. But I'm guided in this respect by what was told to me by a friend of mine with close contacts in the ruling circles in Russia, whom I consider to be quite honest. And he said that the fact is that these methods were used by the oligarchs, and if they had hesitated to use them, they would have not made the fortunes they made. By the end of the 1990s, the corrupt system that was put in place, that allowed the appropriation of property, and the lawlessness that deprived individuals in Russia of any feeling of personal security, had also destroyed the economy of the country. The oligarchs had a different mentality as a group than Western capitalists or even the robber barons with whom they often compared themselves. If the robber barons in the United States, despite ruthless price cutting, were nonetheless determined to create industries, and they did, and oftentimes, having done so, then contributed generously to philanthropic enterprises, the Russian oligarchs were simply concerned to divide up what already existed. And under these circumstances, they did not bring anything of their own to the Russian economy. The results were catastrophic. The Russian economy lost a half of its gross national product. That didn't happen even under Nazi occupation. There are estimates, which I think are reliable, that Russia during the 1990s, as a result of the severe economic collapse and the psychological crisis which accompanied it, experienced 6 million surplus deaths. By surplus deaths, we mean deaths that could not have been accounted for on the basis of previous demographic trends. Under these circumstances, the chances of Yeltsin being re-elected, or of a Yeltsin-chosen successor, a Yeltsin-designated successor, being freely re-elected in 1999-2000 in Russia, were virtually nil. In fact, a public opinion poll in the run-up to the 2000 elections, which is when Putin became president, showed that Yeltsin had the support of 2% of the population. A similar poll regarding Putin also showed that he had the support of 2% of the population. Now, some of you may know in any public opinion poll, 6% of the respondents don't understand the question. As a result, we can assume that no one in Russia actually supported Putin Putin or Yeltsin at that time. But what came next were the mysterious apartment bombings, the adroit redirecting of the popular anger over privatization toward the Chechens, a war in which Russia enjoyed initial successes, the emergence of Putin, very carefully stage-managed, as the savior of the country, and the preservation of the Yeltsin oligarchy and the radicalization of the concentration of power that took place under Putin's authority and at the behest of the clan that he put together of former KGB officers to run the country. Putin, in effect, saved the corrupt Yeltsin oligarchy. He poses as being opposed to it. He was their savior. And the result of his coming to power was that the KGB, which was the only instrument capable of organizing provocations and saving the Yeltsin-era oligarchy from criminal prosecution, was now in charge of the country. Well, the subsequent events we know. The abolition of the direct election of governors, the conversion of the parliament into simply a rubber stamp for the executive branch of government, and perhaps most important, the taming of the oligarchy. Taming in the sense that the oligarchy and its wealth was placed at the service of the KGB regime. It was under the Yeltsin people, the Putin people like to talk about managed democracy or sovereign democracy. What they're talking about, of course, is the facade of democracy, which conceals the reality of total control and a president for life. The accumulation of crimes of which they are guilty, including by all appearances, participation of the FSB in the apartment bombings, make it very difficult for them to even contemplate giving up power. The wealth that they've accumulated, having mastered the instruments of government and coercion, is such that they also can't afford to give up power. So therefore, the Putin years have been characterized not just by the improvement of the Russian economy, undoubtedly as a result of the increase in raw materials prices, but also the steady creation of the conditions for the KGB ruling group in Russia to hold on to its power and not to surrender it under any circumstances. Under these circumstances, the emergence of Mikhail Khodorkovsky was a grave threat to the whole dynamic of Russian political development. Khodorkovsky, if we look at it in theoretical terms, attempted to argue in his actions and in his words that the theory that free markets create the rule of law was in fact accurate. He held, and he tried to show, that capitalism, however corruptly it was created, was self-correcting, and it would eventually lead to genuinely popular liberal institutions that were able to guarantee the future welfare of the country. Unfortunately, what Khodorkovsky did not take into account was the corrupt nature of the Russian political situation. The idea that free markets lead to democratic institutions only exists in a society that has some type of moral context. And as a result of the communist experience, the moral framework of Russian society was destroyed. In the wake of that experience, and under circumstances in which property was distributed without the benefit of legal control, nothing took its place. And under these circumstances, it was not those who represented the dynamism of the market or its inherent possibilities, but rather those who were committed to a system of criminality, who maintained control in Russia and market logic or no market logic, were determined to keep it. People marvel at the vindictiveness of Putin's treatment of Khodorkovsky. After all, Khodorkovsky was one oligarch among many. And certainly, it's hard to understand what he could have done that was so outrageous from Putin's point of view. But looked at another way, in another way, Putin's reaction is only logical, because Khodorkovsky was challenging the whole moral base of the present regime, and the determination of a small group of people to drive Russia to destruction in the pursuit of their own advantage. Under those circumstances, he could not be forgiven and won't be forgiven. And it's under those circumstances that the case has relevance finally for the United States, not just for the United States, but for the Western world. Under the circumstances that exist, if we acquiesce in Khodorkovsky's fate, we acquiesce literally and figuratively in the criminal takeover of the entire country. Therefore, we will lose the basis for raising any other, we will lose the intellectual and moral basis for raising any other objections. And atrocities in Russia are likely to continue. We need only consider the fate of Sergei Magnitsky, who was murdered recently for his efforts to expose corruption in the Ministry of Internal Affairs. The fate of Anna Politkovskaya and Natalia Estemirova, the fate of Paul Klebnikov, and the fate of the Beslan hostages who were shot by Russian forces who opened fire with heavy weapons after an agreement to negotiate an end to the crisis had been reached. So the time has really come for the United States and for the Western world to focus on the events in Russia and focus on the fate of this one man who has very bravely faced the ordeal to which he's been subjected, and to act vigorously and purposefully to prevent him from suffering the fate that seems preordained at the moment, which is a period of confinement that will be just as long as Putin himself intends to stay in power. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for that elegant historical summary, and thank you very much for bringing back the discussion and tying it to policy. We have time for a number of questions. I'm sure there are some burning questions out there. If you would please address it to someone on the panel or a comment generally, and identify yourself and be succinct. All the way in the back against the wall.
My name is Ken Brown. I'm with the private equity group Lion Chase Holdings.
Speak up, please.
My name is Ken Brown, and I'm with a private equity group, Lion Chase Holdings. And I congratulate each of you for your brave summation of what you've been describing in Russia. We are here because we just released a report on commercial real estate holdings in Russia, in Moscow. And just to go over the report real quickly, it was for another private group, but what we learned was that, obviously Moscow real estate is very, very well priced, and some of the chief investors in Russian real estate are Europeans, Goldman Sachs, U.S. investors, etc. And we found it to be very, very inconsistent with reports that capitalism is not thriving in Russia and capitalism is not working in Russia. Moscow real estate prices, commercial, only compare in the world with Tokyo and the U.S. So reading about the developers and the camaraderie apparently with developers in the U.S. and around the world, as far as South Africa, just made me a little bit confused, and I wanted to come to this event to kind of get, to hear your feedback on why does it seem as though some components of Russian capitalism seem to be working, and other components that are widely reported don't seem to be working.
Some components of Russian capitalism working and some which are not working. Maybe we can get a couple of views here on the panel. Vadim, can we ask you first?
Я думаю, что корень этой проблемы состоит в том, что не созданы, как уже говорилось здесь уважаемыми моими коллегами по панели, не созданы институты, которые позволили бы системно регулировать, в том числе и рыночные отношения в России. Это первое.
I think the main problem here is, as it has been mentioned by my fellow panelists, is that there haven't been institutions created in Russia that would help govern this.
В том числе, или, может быть, в первую очередь, институт, который во всем мире движет прогресс, называется свободная конкуренция.
Among them, and perhaps above all, an institution that drives progress worldwide, and that is free competition, fair competition, and of course, free meaning independent justice.
Второе, на что я хотел бы обратить внимание, почему не созданы? Случайно ли то, что они не созданы?
Why those institutions haven't been put in place, and whether or not it was an accident.
И здесь, отталкиваясь от того, что уже звучало сегодня, я хочу сказать, что основной проблемой, самой больной, самой опасной является в сегодняшней России проблема коррупции.
And here, based on what the other two panelists have said, I will say that the biggest, the most sensitive problem that Russia has right now is corruption.
И эта проблема в том числе напрямую отражается на ценах.
And that problem directly impacts prices.
Потому что этот фактор, коррупционные риски или коррупционные расходы, закладываются в цену.
Because prices are determined based on taking into account corruption risks and the costs of corruption.
В том числе и в цену на московскую, например, или, в первую очередь, как самую дорогую московскую недвижимость и другую недвижимость в крупных городах.
And that applies above all to Moscow real estate. Moscow real estate being the most highly priced real estate in Russia, and the same applies as far as pricing and the cost of corruption to the real estate in other major cities of Russia.
И последнее в связи с этим, в связи с коррупцией. Факт сегодняшнего дня состоит в том, что Россия превратилась в очень крупного экспортера коррупции.
And one last thing that has to do with corruption, and that is, it is a modern-day fact that Russia has emerged as a major exporter of corruption.
И всех сопутствующих ей других угроз и проблем.
And all accompanying threats and problems that come with corruption.
И это еще одна очень важная причина, почему состояние верховенства или неверховенства права в России является не российской только проблемой, а проблемой интернациональной.
And that is yet another reason why the issue of rule of law, or rather lack thereof, in Russia is not a domestic Russian issue, rather it is an international problem.
Mm-hmm. Andrei?
Well, first of all, I would like to follow on the latest Vadim point about expert of corruption by Kremlin. It's very important. The most striking example is a former German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, who serves as some middle-rank manager at one of the Putin gas stations. But this city is full of small Washingtonian Schröders. I name well, at least three of them: Thomas Graham, Dmitry Simes, Edward Lazansky. All of them serve through different mechanisms of this Valdai Club, for example, or more directly organizing lobbying and justifying any crimes of Kremlin regime. But more general question asked by gentlemen. I strongly disagree with the point that, well, it's some deficiencies of system, some advantages, maybe with passage of time, the real capitalism system will emerge. My point is that the basic institution of free market and free society are absent in Russia. And I prove my point by 3 quotations. I quote not opposition leader, but very top level figures of regime, and they describe a situation in Russia very clearly. The first one belongs to Speaker of Russian Parliament, Russian Parliament Duma, Mr. Gryzlov. His famous statement is, Duma is not the place for discussion. The second quotation, the wealthiest gentleman in the country, Mr. Deripaska. His famous quotations, every moment I'm ready to give all my wealth to Mr. Putin on one his watch. And the third quotation is nobody else but chairman of election committee. Comrade Putin is always right. So forget about evolution of this system to free market.
David?
Well, I won't add much, but I have a fourth quotation, also from Gryzlov. He said if Putin asked him to jump out of a window, he would do it immediately. So if he ends up falling out of a window, we know that it's because he was asked to do so. In response to your question, I think it's worth pointing out that the situation in Moscow is a little bit misleading. All of the companies that are involved in extraction of raw materials, they have their headquarters in Moscow. They pay their taxes in Moscow. Moscow is the center of bribery. As a result, there's a lot of money there, and a lot of it flows into conspicuous consumption and real estate. That's one of the reasons that you have those high prices. It doesn't mean that ordinary people are living that well, or that people are living well outside of Moscow or outside of the major cities. The whole economy is very warped. Obviously, those people who are able to benefit from the corruption, they have a lot of money to spend. Now, of course, poor Yuri Lushkov has lost his position as mayor of Moscow, but well, he's not poor by any means, but the local city officials in Moscow live, as someone pointed out, like Arab sheikhs who who have access to oil wealth. It's also unearned wealth. In their case, it's the results of bribery and extortion and corruption that flow upward at each level of the city government, ends up feeding a lot of people.
And just fifth quotation.
A fifth quotation.
Mr. Polonsky, the leading developer in Moscow. If you have not $1 billion, go to asshole.
Oh.
Если у вас нет $1 миллиарда, идите в жопу.
For those who
Ariel Cohen.
Russian speakers.
Before the discussion deteriorates further, let me go back to the question of Khodorkovsky. The 3 ministers, either current or previous, testified in the court proceedings. Minister Gref, currently the chairman of Sberbank, former Prime Minister Kasyanov, and current Minister Khristenko, and said that they were not aware in their professional capacity that Khodorkovsky was involved in any embezzlement, and I think also they said they were not aware of any massive tax evasion. Is that correct?
Indirectly.
My question is the following. Washington is the city of policy. So when we're looking at this case, and when we're looking at double jeopardy and prosecution What is it besides having that list that Congress probably is going to adopt in the Magnitsky law, naming 60 officials and forbidding the entry to the United States and possibly freezing their accounts? What other measures the United States, both the executive branch and the legislative branch and the judiciary, can do? Because, after all, there were a lot of American shareholders in YUKOS. They lost their shirt. There are multi-billion-dollar lawsuits going on, stemming out of expropriation and redistribution of YUKOS. So there's certain things our government could be doing. So what are they? And are they doing enough? Thank you.
David, why don't you take the first bite at that?
Well, the measures that were adopted in the Magnitsky case, the denial of visas, that's an extremely important precedent, and which could be expanded to apply to many other people, including persons involved in the theft of the YUKOS assets. The fact is that the rulers of Russia at the present time are not anti-Western in the sense that they cannot stand to be here. On the contrary, they're very anxious to have access to the West for themselves and for their children. And such measures as restrictions on visas are, of course, extremely effective, not just in terms of the practical difficulties that they create, but because of the psychology. These people, warped as their point of view may be, love to see themselves as international playboys and international consumers. They don't like to be judged in a manner which is consistent with their behavior. Symbolically, denying them visas will of course bring home to them that they are outcasts, and rightly so, as a result of the way in which they behave. As far as the lawsuits that are concerned, have been filed by the foreign YUKOS shareholders, I believe Vadim has more information about that. But my understanding is that the perspectives in that situation are quite good.
Vadim, let's turn to you.
Я к упомянутому вопросе Ариэля трем уважаемым господам, высокопоставленным сейчас или в недалеком прошлом, еще бы одного добавил, который в суде тоже был. Это господин Геращенко, председатель Центрального банка Российской Федерации, очень авторитетный.
Would like to add yet another individual's name, who, in addition to the three mentioned by Ariel in his question, also came to the courtroom and gave testimony, and he's someone who's extremely credible and widely respected, Mr. Gerashenko, former Russian central banker.
Тем более, что он на последнем этапе был председателем совета директоров ЮКОС.
What adds to his credibility is that during the bankruptcy of YUKOS, he was chairman of the board of YUKOS.
Вот он на вопрос о том, что он думает по поводу этих обвинений, хищении всей нефти и всех сопутствующих, со свойственной ему афористичностью сказал: да чушь это собачья.
So he, when asked about his opinion on the possibility of embezzlement and whether or not it happened, etc., he's known for his knack to speak in sound bites. He said it's bullshit.
Он также рассказал много интересного в суде о том, как давили на аудитора, американскую компанию PricewaterhouseCoopers.
He also talked at length in court about how pressure was brought on auditors who happened to be the U.S. company PricewaterhouseCoopers, and the pressure came from the investigators and the prosecutors.
Чтобы получить от них выгодные следствия, но ложные.
To get the company to make statements that were, albeit false, were instrumental in the prosecutors building their case.
И я говорил, когда выступал, о том, что помимо прямых экономических потерь, есть еще угроза безопасности и бизнесу, и конкретным людям, иностранным, в том числе американским, со стороны тех, кто осуществляет расправу по делу Ходорковского и Лебедева.
And I did say that in addition to direct economic losses, there is also the threat to the business of many businesses, including those owned by foreign citizens and nationals. The threat being posed by those who are breaking up YUKOS and massacring YUKOS-related individuals.
По совокупности этих причин я, например, абсолютно уверен в том, что этот вопрос должен быть в повестке дня американо-российского диалога на всех уровнях, включая самый высший.
And due to
Должен быть
the
наверху этой повестки.
totality of these reasons, I believe that this question should not just be simply on the agenda of the Russian-U.S. discourse, but at the very top of this agenda at all levels of these interactions.
Я полагаю, что это в интересах обеих стран,
And
и
I think
обоих обществ, российского и американского.
And I think that would benefit the interests of both nations and both societies.
И я полагаю, что это требует продвижения на этом пути, требует как публичных, так и непубличных дипломатических.
And I think that if progress is to be made along these lines, both public and private diplomatic moves are required.
Что касается судебных процессов в иностранных международных
As far
судах,
as the prospects of lawsuits in foreign courts,
существует уже большое количество судебных решений иностранных судов, в которых дается очень жесткая и очень верная оценка этого дела как коррупционного, политически мотивированного,
a lot of
несправедливого.
rulings have already been passed by foreign courts that have characterized this case as unfair, politically motivated, and corruption-based.
Разумеется, еще будут такие решения,
Clearly.
поскольку это дело продолжается.
There will be more similar. There will be other similar rulings because the lawsuits are still pending.
И это позорит страну, это бьет по ее репутации.
And this, of course, disgraces Russia. It damages its reputation.
Но за этим стоят интересы конкретных людей в России, в том числе коррупционные, в первую очередь коррупционные интересы.
But again, on the other end of efforts resisting these rulings are the interests of specific individuals in Russia, including those who are creating and perpetrating corruption.
Таким образом, здесь речь идет об отстаивании общих базовых ценностей, человеческих,
The
общественных.
matter at hand is the defense of universal fundamental values.
Не больше, не меньше.
No more, no
В
less.
том числе, конечно, и право собственности, и активности,
Including,
защиты
of course,
контрактов.
the right of to private property, contractual law, the right to protect one's assets
И
and
еще
have
и еще раз защиты
contracts
от коррупции.
enforced. And again, the right that the individuals must have to defend themselves against corruption.
Andre, do you want to weigh in on this?
Yes,
In-
certainly visa denials is obvious, logical, and very efficient step, but only first step in right direction.
in close to the microphone.
Every financial analyst and every political analyst in the West understands that, for example, Milhaus company, formerly owned by Mr. Abramovich, and Gunvor company, formerly owned by Mr. Chimchenko, are criminal organization because money laundering is crime on international law. And just a visit of modest financial inspector of investigator to headquarters of this company will impress so-called Russian political elite greatly, because it's well known in Russia also that these two companies are jewels of Mr. Putin's personal financial empire. But certainly political will is necessary for sending such a message.
Julie Garen.
Juliana Pilan, I teach at the Institute of World Politics, and I had the great honor of being a college classmate of David Satter. And I should say that he was popular with his students even then. The flip side of attacking the bad guys is helping the good guys. My question to you is this. I'm familiar with some of the heroic efforts of Andrei Larionov to energize and organize the opposition such as it is. Why is the opposition so weak?
You
Vadim?
Oh, I can offer my assessment of it,
Is your old classmate.
which is that Russia has undergone continuous trauma, really from the beginning of the 20th century until the present time, and throughout all of these many decades, Russians hoped for better conditions. And Khrushchev promised that by the year 2000, no, by the, what was 1980, that was it, 1980, that the Soviet Union will have built communism and surpassed America. Well, it didn't happen. And then Gorbachev promised democratization, which happened up to a point, but it didn't lead to a true democracy. And the promises of the young reformers were disappointed because Russia fell into a catastrophic economic depression. So when, beginning with Putin's accession to power in 2000, living standards in Russia, after so many years, finally began to improve. And people, for the first time, were able to travel, were able to buy things, were able to aspire, maybe not to a great standard of living, but something a great deal better than what they had experienced before. People simply gave up on democratic politics and on self-expression and decided, well, it's hopeless to try to create a democracy in this country, but at least let's hope that the people who are ruling us will continue to provide us with a decent standard of living. And that psychology can persist to this day. At the same time, the opposition has been very fragmented and has not really concentrated on moral issues. The opposition that was organized in part by Garry Kasparov tried to combine the national Bolsheviks, which are a kind of group of anarchistic and nihilistic young people, with the Communist Party, with traditional Democrats. And of course, you cannot organize people on the basis of a common front of negation. There has to be something positive in what you're offering. And so far, the democratic dissidents have been very weak in their ability to offer that.
Vadim?
Я полагаю, что мне особенно нечего добавить к тому, что сказал Дэвид, но еще может быть дополнительно один пункт, что, к сожалению, наша власть так боится даже гипотетической оппозиции, что всячески препятствует любому какому-то такому движению, любой активности граждан. И это каждый раз нужно преодолевать. Тем не менее, некоторые проявления такой гражданской активности все-таки мы видим, да, но пока они в первую очередь касаются более житейских проблем, чем каких-то более высоких ценностей.
There is little I could add to what David has said. Perhaps one thing that should be seen as a factor that is hampering down opposition's efforts to organize themselves is that the authorities are so hypersensitive to any opposition, even theoretical notion of opposition, that they overreact to just about any kind of opposition behavior. And that too makes it difficult for opposition to exist, let alone organize itself. I would say that there are now certain signs and evidence of opposition behavior, more so recently than before. So opposition is happening. I would refer to it as opposition activity is happening. Although the issues tackled by this opposition behavior are more day-to-day issues, issues that regular people deal with on a daily basis, and they don't like the way those issues are handled. This is not the highly moral issues and democratic ideals and whatnot that the opposition is concerned with at the moment.
Andrei? Here.
Well, I wouldn't agree completely with the point that opposition is very weak. Yes, it's weak organizationally, it's not represented on TV, but intellectually, I think it's very strong. 10 years ago, only few people have been denouncing Putin regime. Now, what me and my colleague taught 10 years ago is mainstream of Russian political elite. We imposed our own political discourse in Moscow because no political propaganda officer of Kremlin dares now to justify or to defend Putin regime. Even the spin doctor number one, Mr. Pavlovsky, repeats again and again that time of Putin ended and so on. I personally had several public clashes with him in internet, and practically he agreed with everything I said. It was impossible 3 or 4 years ago. Or the latest example about Ushkov, what Kremlin propaganda is doing, the equalization of Milov Nemtsov book. So no, I don't agree with that.
I think we'll take a couple more. One right here on the wall.
My name is Peter Volkovitsky.
Speak up, please.
My name is Peter Volkovitsky. I am a Russian immigrant. At present, I'm federal employee here in metropolitan area.
Still more,
and,
sorry. It's a very weak
okay,
microphone.
Fine. And I would like to come back to main problem of our meeting today, to the rule of law. The most important event of the last week was mentioned several times here today. That is the dismissal of the Moscow mayor, Lushkov. And my question is to all panelists. Would you expect the same trial as happened with Khodorkovsky with respect to Lushkov and his wife, Baturina, who is one of the oligarchs in Russia now?
Andrei, why don't you start with that one?
Well, from the point of view of power, of kleptocracy, self-preservation, it's impossible. Because the next step after Lushkov trial will be Putin trial. And if Lushkov has only one wife, Baturina, with business connection, Putin has 12 or 13 such business wives. Timchenko, Abramovich, brothers Kovalchuk, brothers Rothenbergs, and so on and so on, including this small gentleman named Medvedev, by the way, also. But I don't exclude it, because what is going on in Moscow for the latest 2 weeks, it's self-flagging of power. It's, well, imagine the most loyal, most conformist Russian TV watcher following this movie about Lushkov. Even to the most uneducated, unsophisticated people, 2 questions occurs. The question number 1 is if Lushkov is such a monster, where were Putin and Medvedev for this 10 years? And question number 2, maybe Putin and Medvedev are the similar, like Lushkov. And question number 3 also, well, everybody knows that this movie is a equalization of Milov Nemtsov book Lushkov 10 years. But Milov Nemtsov book has Milov published a second book, Putin 10 years. So maybe they show us next movie from this serial. So yes, it's impossible from the point of view, but they're already making impossible things, and it illustrates the points of complete dismantling and ideological, political, and intellectual degradation of regime.
David, would you have any advice to give to former Mayor Lushkov?
Well, not a lot, but I would like to note that the regime has very little respect for the intelligence of the Russian public. I think this is a natural result of having control over the television media for so long. They clearly are not worried, or else they've not given thought to the conclusions that people will draw from these televised exposés of Lushkov. I must say, I wrote a book about the rise of the Russian criminal state, and I wrote about all these things years ago, and people, in fact, were aware of what Lushkov was doing as early as 1992, when he became, that's 18 years ago, when he became the mayor of Moscow. In fact, foreign visitors arriving at Sheremetyevo Airport or at the other Moscow airports when in those years were amazed by the extent to which the Russian government was willing to allow foreigners to be greeted by the mafia in the form of criminal cab drivers and when they arrived at the airports, and there were no security measures. And it was only then that it was explained to me that, in fact, this is the government that's behind these thieves. So there's nothing here that's new for Russians, nothing that they really were not fully aware of. And I think when they see these television broadcasts, what they think is, the lesson that they draw from it is not, oh my God, that Lushkov is corrupt, we didn't realize. No, they realize completely well. They draw the conclusion, aha, somebody's out to get him now, or he's lost power. And that's the conclusion they draw from these things. And these broadcasts show that the regime has a completely novel way of communicating with the public by letting them know that Lushkov is out of favor, by telling them the things that they already knew but were afraid to talk about, but now are willing to talk about.
Vadim.
Я думаю, что сам по себе факт вот такого даже не отставки, а отрешения от должности в связи с утратой доверия президента в отношении московского мэра — событие, безусловно, выдающееся.
I think that the mere fact of the Moscow mayor's resignation, actually resignation is not the appropriate word here, because he's been sacked, quote, estranged from his position due to the loss of trust on behalf of the president, unquote. And the fact that he's been sacked, and especially with this kind of language, is an extraordinary event.
Я, с другой стороны, пока не вижу какой-либо связи между этим событием и торжеством верховенства права в России, так же, как и учетом мнения гражданского общества.
Although, this having been said, I do not see any connection whatsoever between the sacking of Lushkov and the rule of law in Russia, or taking into account the opinion of the Russian public.
Это, несомненно, результат какого-то выяснения отношений во властных элитах.
Obviously, what has happened, or at least that's the way it looks so far, what has happened to Lushkov is the result of some falling out that occurred at somewhere in the midst of ruling elite.
Пока нам не объяснили, нам, это я имею в виду российскому обществу, что привело к утрате доверия президента в отношении московского мэра. Что именно?
As of yet, we, the Russian public, have not been told what exactly has caused the president to lose trust in the mayor of Moscow.
Особенно вот с учетом того, что мои коллеги говорили, что он, в общем, ну, не вчера пришел.
Especially in the light of what has been just mentioned by my colleagues, which is exactly right, that it's not that Lushkov has held this job for a week or something like that.
В этом смысле,
He's been there
и
forever.
учитывая, что у нас сейчас в очередной раз провозглашена борьба с коррупцией, бескомпромиссная и до полной победы,
And in this sense, given that for the umpteenth time, the Russian authorities have proclaimed that campaign against corruption will be waged until corruption is dead.
нельзя исключить каких-то громких процессов, в том числе и уголовных, судебных,
It is
в
possible
отношении высокопоставленных чиновников, в том числе и
that
московских.
there will be some high-profile trials against high-ranking officials, including the Moscow-based from the Moscow mayor's office.
Для меня более важен другой аспект проблемы.
I find a different aspect of this problem more important.
В ситуации, когда закон применяется избирательно, а как система не работает, мы все заложники.
In a situation where law is used selectively and does not work as a system, all of us are hostages.
И в любой момент все,
And
что
at
угодно,
any point in time,
может произойти с
anything
любым человеком,
can happen to anybody,
в том числе и
including
высокопоставленным.
including to the powers that be.
И эта проблема, эта сторона проблемы для меня гораздо более
this
важна, в том
aspect-
числе и в контексте того дела, которым я сейчас занимаюсь.
And this aspect of it is more important to me, including in the context of the case that I'm working on.
А судьба господина Лужкова, я думаю, так или иначе разрешится, и все будет так, как должно быть по справедливости.
And I think that Lushkov's future somehow will play out, and
Пусть будет с ним так, как должно быть по
my wish
справедливости.
is that whatever happens to him, hopefully, will be based on justice and fairness.
I think this is a good place to stop. Our guests are on a tight schedule, and I want to give you all a chance to come up and greet them, should you choose. Let me say simply that it's left to me to thank them. Vadim Klugant, David Satter, and our own Andrei Puntkovsky. David's our own too, but he's got the longest resume, so I don't want to make it any longer. Thank you very much for a stimulating conversation. I think this is the kind of conversation we ought to have at least once a year, and maybe we could get the three of them back about this time next year. Thank you all for coming. Great. Thank you very much. Come back. Приезжайте еще раз.